That's
the other room.
We're getting a few people trickling in for those of you who are here. Thanks for joining us. But we'll get kicked off maybe a couple minutes from now, giving people a chance to filter in. I see some people over on the participants panel. So thanks for joining us. If you're here again, give us just a couple more minutes. Let people kind of trickle in as they're getting off of their probably last meeting. If they're like Prodly, we have a joke around here that it's the Prodly 3. Everyone's always 2 to 3 minutes late to everything. So give us a few to let people in. Hey, Shannon, I know you're going to probably say the same thing.
Hello. Yes. Hi, guys. Welcome. Thank you for joining. We're going to give this a couple minutes and we'll get started. Take a seat, walk around, and we'll be back with you shortly. All right. Hi, guys. I think we should just get started, and then the latecomers are welcome to join us, of course. So today we're talking about post-go live and a little bit about when is it time to go live. I know as a marketeer, I can spend hours and hours on end perfecting that one campaign, always finding something to tweak. Same, I think, goes for CPQ, but how do you know when you're ready to go live is the big question today.
Yeah, and so I can start with that. I'm going to introduce myself. So, hi everybody, welcome. Thanks for joining. My name is Phil Rapp. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer at Ascribe IT. We are an implementation firm focused on quote to cash. We do implementation services as well as managed services, and we're going to kind of talk about sort of the intersection between the two things today. So yeah, to answer the question, previously we were talking about environment strategy and how a solid mix of implementation plan and DevOps strategy kind of brings you to this point, which is, okay, I've kind of got everything built. I've been working with a consulting company. I've got everything built, and now it's time to test it and to figure out whether we're ready to go live or not. So there's a little bit of preparation that goes into that around making sure that everything is in our testing environment. Everything is kind of ready to go from the kind of the development perspective, right? At this point, this is when you bring in your more end users. You kind of have like a small group of users that have been directing, been giving requirements, kind of helping direct the build. And kind of seeing previews of what the build looks like as it evolves. And now it's time to bring in the end users, get them familiar with the tool, and start to get feedback, right? So a lot of times folks rush into this aspect of it because like everybody wants to get their hands on the tool. They want to implement, or they want to test and see if it works for them in their daily lives. And what you tend to get is kind of a mixture of defects or that you find and enhancements, right? So one of the things that you want to do as a team, and this is what you kind of working with the steering committee of the client that you're working with, is to determine what is a defect and what is an enhancement. You can't really have a super healthy testing scenario until you kind of have those things worked out, because defects are typically things that were stated, the requirements were stated clearly. We've got user stories, we're ready to go, and everything's been fairly well defined. Defect is something where, hey, this is what I expected, this is what we thought the acceptance criteria was going to be, and then it ends up being something different. An enhancement is, okay, I'm new to the system and I need to do this additional thing as part of my day-to-day, right? Did we consider this? And we kind of have one place for enhancements, one place for defects. So as we move through the user acceptance testing phase, we're responding as an implementation firm, we're responding quickly to defects, and we're kind of figuring out where enhancements might go. Why this speaks to go live readiness is because a lot of companies get in a situation where they don't really know kind of the difference between the two, and you kind of hit this nebulous phase where you're just stuck in a perpetual UAT.
Yeah.
And Jay, I mean, you've seen this before, where it can be really kind of harmful to the overall success of the project when you get stuck in kind of this mode, right?
So a lot of it to me, and I haven't been a developer, some CPQ, but a lot more general just stuff in there. To me, it was always a byproduct of figuring out, you talked about when enough is enough, or when is good enough, really good enough, or what does that come down to? And you get stuck sometimes in this UAT, this final pre-prod, or you almost end up in this paralysis by analysis phase, that it's never quite good enough. And to me, a lot of that, it's funny, we're talking about post go live plan, but we're going back to the beginning, setting up the criteria of when do we know this is ready for release? Like setting that up front, putting the expectations. I'm a big expectations guy, so making expectations clear up front, or when is this ready to go out? And I don't have the magic wand to wave and tell everybody it's exactly this point. That's a part of it, right? Knowing when good enough for you is good enough for you, and that depends upon your requirements, the users, but it all comes down to how you outline the project up front. What does the scope look like? Have you defined those KPIs, throwing some business terms around and throwing a lot of dev terms around? You talked about user stories and user acceptance testing and strategy in terms of branching. Is it a hotfix org? That's kind of my preferred term. Is it that break fix or hotfix? Is it overall enhancements? Is it that pipeline? But all of that comes down to how do we scope the project up front? What has led us here? Do we feel good with the testing that's been done? And again, to your point, not just the people who have been involved in the entire project. Right? You don't want your testers to be the people that have been with you every step of the way. You don't want your only testers to be those people that have been with you every step of the way. It's important. You need to bring in people who are new to the project, who are new to this, because that's ultimately who you're designing for, not designing with. So you better bring them in at the end to do the testing. So that's a key piece to me as well. But it all comes back to the strategy up front, post go live, when you're ready to go live. What do we do now? A lot of those are byproducts of what do we do to scope the project up front to put those milestones in place. The stake in the ground, these are the things that now function as expected, have been tested and approved. We can go live. Then we can start to talk about the post go live and really where the power of CPQ comes from here. What do we do with this as this is a living, breathing beast that we're going to use, continue to modify, to train, to tame, whatever term you want to use, to refine into our business use.
That's right. And I mean, I think the trap that a lot of people implementing CPQ fall into is a nebulous at best go live plan,
Mhm.
right? So for me as the implementer, I'm looking to define not what it takes to go live necessarily, but kind of what it takes, like what it looks like after we go live,
Right.
because as when we, I talked about defining those defects versus enhancements.
Mm-hmm.
Defects are the bare minimum of we need to get this fixed in order to go live. The enhancements are the really important part, which is about usability. It's about extensibility of the platform, of the system. And most importantly, I think it's about eventual user adoption.
Right.
You're hearing these things from these users that didn't to have their say because we just, you have to kind of limit the amount of voices in the room at the beginning during the implementation. When you really, what you need to do is kind of bring their feedback into the fold and then create a go live plan to get those things implemented after the fact.
Great.
So it's a really difficult balancing act from a client perspective, from a kind of an end user perspective, where it's like, okay, this goes in and then this comes later. If you don't define the later, then it's really hard to define the, this is how we go live. These are the conditions under which we go live.
Right.
And Jay, you mentioned just the importance of having a plan to manage and operate the system after go live. That's so important. I think that it gets really. I think it surprises a lot of customers and clients just how necessary it is to have built the system correctly, right, in the implementation phase.
Yep.
And then set up the stage, set a plan so that we can continue to add to it, to modify it as business needs change, as we acquire new companies, that sort of thing. And we have to define that up front, otherwise we don't really know when we can go live.
And even it, so we've defined that, okay, maybe we've gone live, right? We've pushed to production with whatever we have defined, and hopefully it should be defined, is and I hate this term, but the minimum viable product. I don't like that. Market viable product is a better term. If I'm using MVP, I like that better because you throw a minimal in there and it sounds like it's just good enough. Okay, maybe, but kind of a market viable product, whoever your market is, your client, your customer, those people, your users, maybe. But once you've done that, even right away, and you've talked about this break fix or hotfix org, and your developing org, your enhancement org, as you fix bugs, and you're going to have to do that, it's going to get into production and it's going to have some tweaks to make, some things to fix. That's going to happen. As well as we test everything, you're going to have a few tweaks and changes to make, fixes to make. As soon as you do that in that break fix org, you need to replicate that over in your enhancement pipeline, right?
Mm-hmm.
So right away, you've got fixes to make in a break fix org. You've got fixes to push to production, and you have fixes to backfill or sync into your other sandboxes too. Immediately, you've got 3 environments, talking environment strategy again, that you're working with straight away. Every time you're making a change somewhere out of that box, it's at least 2 other ones to push, maybe lower ones as well to do. So now you're getting into what tooling can we use, not just to push everything to production. Okay, maybe you data load everything into production, right? It's a one-time project. You put 60 hours of time if you've got a complex CPQ build, maybe even a moderately complex CPQ build. You write that into your own project plan. Great, you got that done, but what happens now moving forward? Where do you bring in a solution to help you make changes? Those enhancements, they're going to keep coming forever. Those bug fixes, hopefully they're going to drop off a little bit, but they're going to keep coming too. So what do you do that every time you make an enhancement or a bug fix, you're not going to spend 2 or 3 hours releasing a few minor changes to a bunch of environments that you have to? Here's the Prodly side of Jay coming in. That's why Prodly was built, to facilitate the ongoing value of CPQ and data-heavy configuration packages, where those things should be adapting. They should be changing. You should be allocating resource, prioritizing. We're getting to more DevOps again, and we had a little talk about this, Phil, Shannon, and I kind of did yesterday, about some things you need to do in here. You need to start talking about, all right, how do we track? How do we gather enhancements from our users? Do they just email somebody? Maybe. Is that sufficient? Could be. Is there a shared Excel spreadsheet? A lot of times that's the way people are going. Is it some modified case record, right? A record type in cases in the system. Whatever it is, how do you gather feedback from your users? How do you then prioritize and stack rank that? How do you assign that work? How do you create an environment that is not just your full sandbox, which could be your hotfix and your enhancement box, and that's going to cause all sorts of issues in there. Those are the questions that come live from a post-go live plan. For me, a tactical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is where you really need to have a consulting company that you can trust to not only get you live, but to continue to pull out and groom those requirements, and most importantly, I think, prioritize those requirements for a client, for a company, right? As a IT director, sales ops director, that sort of thing, you're going to get all sorts of input, throughout the life of your CPQ operation, right? And you kind of want to make everybody happy, but you have to really consider the overall impact on the system, right? Like any risks that might come with redesigning something, because like a particular group of people you would prefer it done this way instead. This is where managed services really comes in, and this is where a lot of companies feel like they're ready to go as soon as they're live. Maybe I've even got my CPQ person trained and we know how to build it, but you need a consulting firm that, now that you've defined your post go live process, can continue to kind of manage and groom this operation as if it were an implementation. We're still doing requirements. We're still doing user stories. We're doing prioritization. We're doing must have versus should have sort of analysis, right? And that's what Ascribe IT. That's what my firm does really, really well from a managed services perspective, is to kind of continue to have that approach where we're not done here. In fact, we're just getting started.
Right.
Most of the time, like I said, clients don't have kind of that person that can continue to not only elicit requirements, but also prioritize them in the right way. That's the best for the company.
Yeah, and
we bring up to
put something in the chat here. You talked about different people. You threw around a center of excellence, right? A committee, a steering committee, whatever that is. Mm-hmm. There's just a quick overview of 3 different personas that should be involved. I'm not saying that might be involved. These are all people that should be involved. The people doing the work, the building, the release managers, the users, the people with hands on keyboard that are affected by the system. And you've got people who are willing to write the check for CPQ licenses or solutions to help the other groups here. 3 different questions, all on the committee, all related to CPQ right now. There's a lot to manage right here. And this is why typically this isn't one person that's doing this work. You need multiple individuals in there, from end user to director and champion, whatever term you might want to use there, that is going to say, you know what, CPQ looks like it's working, but show me how. What are the metrics? How has this affected revenue? How has this brought quicker time to value? Can they generate quotes that are correct quicker? So those kind of metrics are involved in there. And if you involve everybody up front as a steering committee, and they all have their own stakes in the ground, I'm going to use that term again. But again, you can start to talk about what does the go live time look like? And then moving forward, how do we prove value to these different audiences that are involved in here? This is where working with somebody like Phil, and honestly, Phil, you've got much more experience in this than I do. Again, I'm kind of tactical trench kind of guy here in there. How do I move my solutions? How do I move my changes along? So it probably does well. But also, how do I integrate my work management platform? Mm-hmm. So there's other things that we can do as a provider like yourself, or broadly. How do I tag this feature request when I prioritized it, right? How do I work with Phil? Then how do I get it in a system where I've got user stories? How do I prioritize? How do I track the work I'm doing against these kind of things that are in here? That way, when a persona I didn't put in the chat, compliance comes knocking down on your door every 6 months, every quarter, whatever it is, how do you prove them the things that are changing were meant to be changed? The people doing the changes weren't promoting the changes to production. How do we have the audit trail and the paper trail involved? That's where tooling comes in. You end up with a people and a process and a product. Kind of the 3 P's of successful CPQ. CPPQ, maybe it's quite a new phrase, maybe. The people, the processes, the product behind configure, price, and quote that might be there. That's the idea, the big picture. When I was doing this work, I was always caught in the minutia of, I just need to release this feature, right? Yeah. I just need to do this and release it, but there's a lot more at play here.
Well, I mean, yeah, you've hit it on the head, Jay, which is, we tend to become de facto program managers.
Right.
We're not just talking about, prioritizing one CPQ thing over another, right? Excuse me. We're prioritizing, different parts of the organization that have, like, in order to allocate certain people, you have to kind of learn how the whole organization is looking to, realize their ROI.
Right.
What are the other competing, IT initiatives, that sort of thing. A lot of times I get pulled into meetings in IT initiatives that have nothing to do with CPQ.
Right.
Just to kind of give my perspective on where does the ongoing CPQ operation fit in the overall organizational strategy. So it's a really cool position to be in, for one. But also it really speaks to just how, if anything, going live doesn't make things simpler and smaller. It makes things bigger and more complex, right?
Yeah.
And I think, again, a lot of times people, clients feel like once we're live, we're over this big hump. We love implementation. Now we can relax, and this is actually when the work really starts.
Right. Yeah. Even the fact that you just put something new in the hands of 50, 20, 25, 100 users, right? That right there adds complexity, because now you've got 100 other voices coming at you with stuff to do. That can be overwhelming, but it's definitely not the time to take a holiday at that point after the go live. Plan a little bit of time. It's going to be a lot of work after that. And it's kind of funny, Phil, you and I have been chatting off and on, both on this and off, and you're a big picture guy who can deliver on these cool plans, and I'm a tactical guy. You've got this technical skills as well, but really the dichotomy of kind of our different perspectives here is interesting, and I'm glad we're able to talk about some of these different things that I never really think about, right? So when I get to post go live plan, I immediately go to, okay, what do I need to do now? How do I now go about managing an application that is in many ways fundamentally different than what Salesforce was doing for a long time, with a lot of Apex code and metadata and chain sets or source control or whatever you want to do on there? How do I go from that, which Salesforce gives you? You hit new dev sandbox, guess what? That metadata is in there. Really cool. Moment in time, you get all that stuff. Not for CPQ. So now what happens when you need to make a change? But the change you have to make is fundamentally altered, modified, changed, and governed by everything that already existed, too.
Yep.
Which means you need all of that in there to do your work. So me, it's okay, what does my release strategy look like now? Well, plan out your release, right? Work management side. What does the sprint look like? Dev, what is the release? What is the sprint? What are the work items that are in there? Okay, now how do I get people an environment that actually has this data in there so they can go do the work? Now I go request a new sandbox or a refresh one. Great. What do I do to get CPQ in there? Well, do I spend 20 hours data loading a bunch of stuff in there and I hope I get it all? No, I bring in a solution. I bring in a Prodly. So 45 minutes later, my environment is ready. That microclimate is good to go. My integration box is there. My UAT box. Hey, if I want to keep things in sync, I use a tool like Prodly to keep my hotfix or my enhancement org in sync with those hotfixes automatically behind the scenes. That's where I get into how do I enable my admins and my devs to go in there and effectively do the work as quickly as possible. But all the stuff in front of that is critical too. What work is that? How to do it? Who's involved? Who okays that? How many hours? Do I have to pull resources from another group to do this? Those are the conversations, Phil, you get brought into that are kind of cool and a little jealous during those.
We talked about kind of using Prodly for environment management during implementation, right?
Right.
I've been working with a client now for about a year who was able to manage, all of that using data loader and that sort of thing. And it wasn't until they actually went live and started instituting a process where they wanted to do a minor release every 2 weeks and a major release every month, where that's when they really started kind of missing an integrated DevOps tool, right?
Yep.
And that's when we started talking about Prodly specifically, because it's really, really important to not only manage, kind of the, the movement of data into, like, to bring healthy data into a development box so that you can work on kind of a longer term initiative, right? While keeping your break fix environment very, very close to production and with very, very little kind of competing development initiatives. But also just having a repeatable, data map and a process by which, I know that when I can change, X, Y, and Z in order to, continue to build up my CPQ and to have it move, a change as my business needs change. And have that be a repeatable thing that, like you said, it doesn't take it. It's not a go live effort every single time. Rather, it's a very incremental and a repeatable effort, right?
That's key. And it kind of maybe getting towards the bottom of the hour. We'll hang out if there's questions from people here, of course. We'll hang out. But I am a kind of a lowest common denominator. I like to put a wrap. I like to kind of talk about what we've talked about, distilling as much as possible as we get towards the end of this. And some of the resonating themes here is post go live starts at almost like project launch, right? Because you need to put a definition of when go live happens. You can't post go live until you go live. And you can't go live until you've defined what go live looks like for you. So defining that early. Sticking to that, right? Don't get caught up in UAT where you continually refine to get it just that little bit better. Marginal changes are great, but when you're making marginal changes and it's costing you a month or 2 months on your schedule to go live, you're losing the value in CPQ. You've given up all the tangible benefit of that for 2 months. You've just removed 2 months of the ROI from CPQ. Again, talking ROI pieces there. You've taken that away. Get an idea of, okay, what do we do now? Who's involved? What's the difference between a fix and an enhancement, right? That's key. Where do I do those changes in there? Who's involved in those? How do I report back to my audience, whoever that be? It's the users, the developers, the admins, the directors, UAT, QA. How do I report back with success going forward? So how do I do my measures for success? And then ultimately, what do I do now that I have to maintain something that could be a copy of go live effort, using your term right there, Phil? That was a great term. How do I prevent the same level of effort for go live as I'm making changes that I should be making and be expected to make as I move forward? So kind of the themes that are there. I didn't give you a how-to on those stuff, but those are questions you should answer as you're thinking about CPQ, rolling out CPQ, and even changing CPQ if you've already got it running right now. I think I cut them all. I think I did a pretty good recap right there. Getting some smiles and some nods. But I appreciate I get a lot out of these sessions, to be honest with you. I love the perspective coming from, again, maybe the other side, somebody working with some of those other people that I don't get to talk to a lot. And Phil, I really appreciate your input, the experience you bring to the table. And I know managed services it's not just CYA, right? A cover your assets kind of thing here. It's more than insurance. It's giving you the skills you need to be successful as you move forward.
Mm-hmm.
That's the key. And even if those managed services providers aren't going in there and building everything for you, they have a perspective that is critical to your success. They can really help you plan out kind of what your future roadmap looks like. And that's a really critical piece of this. So again, people, process, product, kind of the 3 Ps.
Yeah, and just to tack on to that, something I wanted to bring up, which is that part of our role as managed services providers is to usher you into being fully independent in your CPQ operation. Right. The reason that we're necessary is because that's a process, and it's a process that you don't quite you can't even really start to undertake until you've gone live and you start to form that operational strategy in order to realize full value out of your CPQ. So I'm always thinking about who can I bring in to kind of take on some workload, right? Our goal is to kind of like set up your process, like work it for 6 months and make sure that it's the right one for you, and then ultimately like leave it in your hands to manage your own CPQ operation, which is what we ultimately want to do.
No, that's good. I appreciate that. That's a good perspective. You're not looking to tag yourself into their environment forever. That's not the goal. The goal of a good service provider, a good partner, right? That's really the word. A good partner is to give them a roll-off plan. So you got to go live, post go live, help you get to that roll-off plan of how do I set you up for success moving forward. That's the goal there. So yeah, I appreciate that piece there. Maybe I kind of missed that. And
no, you didn't. And frankly, I kind of jumped in because that kind of sets up this meeting, right?
Yeah. All right. It definitely does when we talk about engagement and those kind of pieces here when we'll come back next week. And that's a really good segue into maybe a week from now, but it's a good segue into same bad time, same bad place kind of next week as we go into the new subject. So thank you again. I appreciate it on my side. And thanks for listening in too.
Awesome. Again, thank you both so much. Bill and Jay and I will be here if you have any questions. They'll be more quick to answer most of them, but I'll be hanging out anyway. So do let us know.
Yeah.
I think I see Ravi as a return from last week. Do I have that right?
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah.
I got to throw this into. If you haven't noticed, this is a third different hat option. I have gone with a hat theme for our kind of gathering our series that's going on right now. So.
Actually, I'm waiting for when you're gonna share the real time. The daily CPQ users, how they utilize CPQ in real time. So I'm waiting for that. When that session gonna come?
You're referring to the demo?
Yep.
Like kind of a demo of the user side.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about this internally, right? I'm curious. I can honestly, I can put something together. I'm wondering if your interest, Ravi, is in, just looking, just kind of looking at the CPQ side, or looking specifically at, how Proudly would move like certain pieces of data that you would, like logic that you would build in CPQ. Where's kind of your interest in that?
Actually, I don't know much about CPQ at this point, so I want to start learning.
Sure.
Yeah, so that way, what thing help more, you may know better.
So maybe we talk, and Phil, we've talked a little bit about this. Maybe we queue up, what does it look like to build something, right? Build a rule, whatever that is, maybe. How does that rule affect my users? And then why would it be so complicated to replicate that rule across different environments there? So there's the build side, the user side, and the product side kind of pieces that are there. We've got to figure out how to weave that in, but I think it's something we could do. And it kind of goes into a little bit into the engagement session that'll be next week.
I wanted to know how a typical day of a CPQ admin
Yeah.
would be.
Yeah. So we'll do a bit of a day in the life of a CPQ entity, and we'll talk through the different personas that are involved in that and why A, it's so complicated, so unique. B, why it's so powerful, right? The users, what value do they get? And then C, why it's so hard to actually develop the right way. So I think we can do the APC of that. We'll figure it out. We've got a week here, and Phil, we'll figure out something that makes sense over the course of the next week. And we'll weave in, I don't know, maybe 5-7 minutes of a little screen share time on the next session, which will be a little change. But yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ravi.
Thanks.
And with that, I think I can probably turn it free. I see Jason joined us, but hey, Jason. And
Jason. Hello.
Yeah. Thanks again, Phil. Thanks again, Shannon, putting this together.
You bet.
Ravi and the attendees that were here. I know we'll get this posted as well somewhere in the recording sent out. So, Phil, on a personal note, looking forward to tomorrow afternoon. Kind of wish it was today, to be honest with you, but
Yeah.
And other than that, we'll see you tomorrow. Drive down safe. We'll catch you then. And then Shannon, travel safe as well. And we'll catch up early next week, and we'll put a plan together and get it from there. This is all the good stuff that we can cut out recording in the editing room. So I don't mind talking about this at the end. So.
All right. Thank you so much, guys. Thanks again.
Thanks, guys.